Welcome back to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. Tonight, we're opening something deeply personal. Not ancient tombs or forgotten ruins, but something quieter. The fragile pages of old diaries. For centuries, people recorded their lives in small books, meant for no one but themselves. Hopes, fears, daily routines, strange dreams, and sometimes things they could not explain. Most diaries simply capture ordinary life. But every so often, historians and archivists discover entries that feel different. Pages written in hurried handwriting. Lines repeated in fear. Warnings that something strange was happening. Tonight, we're exploring some of the most chilling warnings ever found in old diaries. Real writings from the past describing encounters their authors struggled to understand. So dim the lights, settle in, and listen closely. Because sometimes the quietest voices from history carry the most unsettling stories. For historians, diaries are among the most valuable windows into the past. Unlike official records or newspapers, they were never meant for an audience. They were private reflections written at night by candlelight. That honesty makes them powerful, but it also makes them unsettling when something strange appears in the pages. One of the eeriest patterns researchers notice is when an otherwise ordinary diary suddenly changes tone. Weeks or months of calm routine weather notes, family activities, small daily events. Then, without warning, the writing becomes uneasy. The author begins describing sounds, shadows, or a feeling of being watched. In the late 18th century, a farmer in rural England kept a simple diary of his daily work. Most entries were predictable. Planting fields, repairing fences, notes about the weather. But one autumn evening, the tone changed. He wrote that while walking near his barn after sunset, he saw what he described as a light moving through the trees where no lantern was carried. At first, he assumed it was a neighbor crossing the field, but the light moved too quickly, too smoothly, as if floating above the ground. The next entry recorded that the light had appeared again, this time near the edge of the forest behind his house. He described watching it drift silently between the trees before vanishing. The farmer tried to explain it away. Marsh gas, a distant lantern. But his writing became increasingly uneasy over the following days. His final entry about the light ended with a short warning. Whatever moves there does not walk as a man does. Another chilling diary comes from a young woman living in New England during the early 19th century. Her journal was filled with descriptions of ordinary life, church gatherings, sewing, visiting neighbors. But scattered throughout the pages were brief notes about something she called the knocking. At first, the sound appeared occasionally, a quiet tapping on the walls at night. She assumed it was wind or settling wood. But the knocking continued. Several weeks later, she wrote that the sounds had begun to follow her through the house. A tap near the door. Then another near the fireplace. Then a slow, hollow knock from the ceiling above her bed. She tried to ignore it, but the entries became more nervous. One night she wrote that she had knocked back against the wall as a test. Moments later, something knocked back. The diary contains several more entries describing the sounds repeating over the next week. And then suddenly, the subject disappears entirely. The remaining pages return to normal daily events, as if the author had decided never to mention it again. Historians have debated what may have caused the sounds. Loose beams, animals in the walls, the natural creaking of an old house. But the chilling detail remains. The moment when she knocked, and something answered. Another diary from the late 1800s contains a warning written with unusual urgency. The author was a schoolteacher traveling between small towns in the American Midwest. His journal mostly described the long wagon journeys and the places he stayed along the way. One winter evening, he wrote about stopping at an isolated farmhouse where he had been offered shelter from a snowstorm. The family living there seemed kind, but he noted something odd almost immediately. None of them would speak after sunset. At first, he thought it was simply a household rule. But as darkness fell, the atmosphere in the house changed. The family moved quietly, avoiding the windows, listening carefully to the sounds outside. Finally, the teacher asked the father of the house why no one spoke after dark. The man reportedly answered with a single sentence: "Because something listens." The diary entry ends abruptly. The next page only says that the traveler left before sunrise and chose a different road the following day. Some of the most unsettling diary entries are not long descriptions at all. Sometimes they are just a single line written with quiet fear. In a preserved Victorian diary, discovered in an attic, one entry reads simply, "The figure stood again at the end of the garden tonight." No explanation, no description, just that single sentence. Yet the same sentence appears again several days later, and again a week after that. The final time it appears, the writer adds only one more phrase, "closer than before." There are no further entries in the diary. Stories like these fascinate historians not because they prove the supernatural, but because they reveal something deeply human. The instinct to record what we cannot explain. When people wrote these diaries, they were not trying to create ghost stories. They were simply documenting their lives. That honesty makes the strange moments feel even more unsettling. Because the writers themselves often sounded confused rather than dramatic. They searched for explanations. Wind, animals, light reflections. And when they could not explain what they had experienced, they simply wrote it down and moved on. Yet across centuries and continents, these quiet warnings appear again and again. A light in the trees, knocking in empty rooms, figures standing silently beyond the edge of the garden. Perhaps there are simple explanations for all of them. Old houses creak, human memory plays tricks, and strange lights in the distance often have natural causes. But when those moments are captured in private diaries written by people who never expected anyone else to read them, they feel different, like whispers carried across time. Small warnings left behind by people who briefly glimpsed something they could not understand. And somewhere tonight, in archives and forgotten boxes tucked away in attics and libraries, there may still be unopened diaries waiting quietly on dusty shelves. Pages filled with ordinary life, weather reports, family notes, until suddenly the handwriting changes. The writer pauses and records something strange. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to subscribe to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries for more strange folklore, eerie history, and unexplained stories from the past. And remember, sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are not found in legends or ghost stories. They're hidden quietly in the pages of someone's private diary.